Look at this photograph. Really, look at it. That's John Salter Jr. in 1963, covered in mustard, ketchup, and sugar, surrounded by a mob screaming obscenities, burned with cigarettes, hit with brass knuckles, blood running from his face as they threw salt into his open wounds. This man sat at a segregated lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi, and refused to move. A hero of the civil rights movement, a sociology professor, a man who literally had an FBI file thousands of pages thick because he fought for justice. 25 years later, he's driving down a rural Wisconsin highway with his son. Missing time happens. And then this decorated civil rights icon tells the world he was abducted by friendly aliens. And the strangest part? His body started changing in ways medical science couldn't explain. This is the John Salter Jr. case, and it forces one haunting question. What happens when one of the most credible figures in American history tells you he met beings from another world? Most alien abduction stories follow the same pattern. Remote location, terrified witness, gray aliens conducting medical experiments, terror and trauma. But what happens when the witness is a documented American hero? Someone who sat calmly while a racist mob attacked him with brass knuckles? Someone the FBI couldn't intimidate? Someone who worked alongside Medgar Evers during the most dangerous days of the civil rights movement? This is Professor John Randall Salter Jr., later known by his Native American name, John Hunter Gray. Born in 1934, died in 2019, a civil rights icon. And in March 1988, on a dark Wisconsin highway, something impossible happened. Before we get to aliens, you need to understand who this man was. His credibility is why this case matters. John Salter Jr. grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. His father was a Wabanaki Indian artist and professor. His mother was a teacher. Young John witnessed discrimination that shaped everything he would become. He joined the U.S. Army, then attended Arizona State University, earning degrees in social studies and sociology. He joined the industrial workers of the World Labor Union. He organized. He fought for justice. In 1961, inspired by the Freedom Rides, he and his wife Eldry moved to Jackson, Mississippi. John taught at Tougaloo College, a historically black institution in the segregated South. He became NAACP Youth Advisor. He worked with Medgar Evers. He published newspapers. He testified before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. May 28, 1963, the day that immortalized him. Salter and Tougaloo students, black and white, sat at the Woolworth's whites-only lunch counter. They refused to move. The mob came. They poured sugar, mustard, ketchup over them, attacked Salter with brass knuckles and broken glass, burned him with cigarettes, threw pepper in his eyes, salt in his open wounds. The air was filled with obscenities, the N-word. It was unbridled hatred, Salter wrote later. A photographer captured it. The image became iconic. Salter covered in condiments, calm and defiant. The world saw Mustard Man. Violence continued, beaten unconscious at protests. Car accident he believed was sabotage. Metal plate in his skull. FBI compiled massive files. Mississippi Sovereignty Commission monitored him. Family threatened. Salter never broke. After Mississippi, voting rights, Native American advocacy, teaching. 1981 to 1994, professor and chair of American Indian Studies at University of North Dakota. Published Jackson, Mississippi, an American Chronicle of Struggle and Schism in 1979. This man was tested by history and past, had everything to lose, was documented, respected, photographed for posterity. When John Salter Jr. said he was abducted by aliens, no hypnosis, just conscious memory, people had to listen. March 20th, 1988, John Salter Jr. and his son, John III, left North Dakota in their pickup, heading south for a speaking tour. First stop, Mississippi. Something went wrong immediately. John drove completely off route. 1 hour later, they were traveling the opposite direction. Neither could explain it. Missing time. They stopped for the night, confused. Next morning, continuing their drive, a bright saucer-like form appeared. It moved at incredible speed, then vanished. Both felt odd familiarity, like recognizing something they couldn't place. The feeling was disturbing. Days passed. The missing time lingered. Then, months later, memories surfaced. Not through hypnosis. Just memories. Natural, detailed, consistent. We were forced off the highway by an unseen force, Salter would later recall. Then we were standing not far from the passenger side of the pickup. It was almost dark. John saw them first. 2 or 3 small humanoid figures climbing up the back bumper of the truck, looking at the gear in the pickup bed, examining it with what seemed like curiosity. The beings were 4 to 4.5 feet tall, thin bodies, thin limbs, but their heads were comparatively large. And their eyes, those eyes were large and slanted. There were 6 or 7 more of these small beings nearby. But then John noticed another figure. This one was different, taller, almost 6 feet tall. All of them communicated telepathically. Not words, exactly. More like thoughts appearing directly in his mind. Clear, unmistakable. The tall being, who seemed to be in charge, guided John and his son through the woods to a secluded clearing. And there, hidden from the highway, was their spacecraft. John's next memory is sudden and jarring. He's in a brightly lit room inside the craft. His son is there too. The beings are present, and they're conducting some kind of medical examination. John felt injections in various parts of his body. Multiple procedures were happening simultaneously. But here's where the Salter case diverges dramatically from nearly every other abduction account. There was no terror, no paralysis, no sense of being victimized. The beings seemed friendly, welcoming even, almost like benevolent doctors conducting necessary medical procedures while trying to keep their patients comfortable. John would later describe them using words that sound impossible given the context. Beneficent, friends. This was no horror movie abduction. This was something else entirely. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. John and his son were back at the truck, back on the highway. Hours had passed, but the memory of what happened, that took months to fully return. Now here's where the John Salter case becomes genuinely difficult for skeptics to dismiss. Because what happened next wasn't in his mind. It was happening to his body, in ways that could be observed, measured, documented. Remember, this is March 1988. John Salter Jr. is 54 years old, not a young man. He's got the wear and tear you'd expect from someone who's lived through what he's lived through. The civil rights beatings, the car accident that left him with a plate in his skull, decades of hard labor organizing and activism. But then the changes started. First thing Salter noticed, cuts and scratches were clotting immediately. Within seconds of appearing, they'd stop bleeding. Then they'd heal rapidly, far faster than normal for a man his age. It was like his body's repair mechanisms had been supercharged. His head hair started growing at 2 to 3 times the normal rate. Same with his fingernails and toenails. He had to cut them constantly. Age spots, those brown spots that accumulate on aging skin, started disappearing. Wrinkles in his face began to fade. Hair started developing all over his arms, legs, stomach, and chest. Areas that had been nearly hairless his entire adult life. And for the first time ever, his beard grew so thick and dark, he had to shave twice a day to avoid 5 o'clock shadow. But perhaps the strangest change? John Salter Jr. had been a smoker. He'd struggled for years to quit. And then, after the abduction, he simply stopped, without even thinking about it. No cravings, no withdrawal. The desire was just gone. His immunity seemed heightened. He stopped getting sick as often. When he did catch something, he recovered faster. And then there was his son, John III. In spring 1991, 3 years after the abduction, family members noticed something impossible. John III had grown more than 1.5 inches taller. At first glance, that doesn't sound strange. Except for one detail. John III was about 19 years old when he stopped growing. Several years before the March 1988 incident, he'd reached his adult height, finished puberty. His growth plates had closed. And yet, 3 years after the abduction, he was measurably taller. That's not supposed to be possible. These weren't subtle changes only Salter noticed. His family saw them. His colleagues at the University of North Dakota saw them. Anyone who knew him could see the physical transformation happening. On the left leg of both John Jr. and John III appeared what abduction researchers call scoop marks. Small, circular indentations in the skin that looked like tissue had been removed with a precise instrument. These marks are commonly reported in abduction cases, but seeing them on both father and son simultaneously, that's corroborating physical evidence. UFO researcher Franklin Rule interviewed Salter extensively and documented the changes. But Salter himself was more measured, more cautious. He didn't go on a publicity tour. He didn't seek fame or money from the story. In fact, he wrote a rare self-published account titled Friends of the Vast Creation, an account of the Salter UFO encounters of March 1988 that most people have never heard of. This wasn't a man trying to cash in. This was a man trying to document something he genuinely believed happened, trying to understand it, and hoping others might help make sense of it. Let's be clear about something. John Salter Jr. didn't need attention. He didn't need money. He didn't need fame. He already had a legacy. That photograph from Woolworth's lunch counter was already in history books. His work in the civil rights movement was already documented by scholars. His book, Jackson, Mississippi, was already considered essential reading. So what did he gain by telling this story? Ridicule, skepticism, people questioning his mental state. That's it. What makes the Salter case uniquely credible comes down to several key factors. First, no hypnotic regression. Most famous abduction cases, Betty and Barney Hill, Travis Walton, the Allagash Four, relied on hypnosis to recover buried memories. Critics rightfully point out that hypnotic regression can create false memories. But Salter and his son? They remembered without any hypnosis at all. The memories surfaced naturally over several months, independently corroborated by each other. No hypnotist to blame. Second, the witness's character and credibility. This wasn't some random person with no documented history. John Salter Jr.'s entire life was a matter of public record. FBI files, news photographs, television coverage, published books, university employment records, a historical legacy verified by scholars. This was a man who sat calmly while a mob attacked him with brass knuckles and broken glass. A man who continued organizing even after a car accident left him with a metal plate in his skull. A man who couldn't be intimidated by the FBI or the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. If anyone had the psychological fortitude to handle an abduction experience without breaking down, if anyone could process something impossible and document it rationally, it was John Salter Jr. III. He had everything to lose by telling this story. His reputation as a serious academic and civil rights activist was his life's work. Telling people he'd been abducted by aliens risked making all of that look foolish. Yet he did it anyway. Fourth, the tone of the encounter. Salter described the beings as friends, as beneficent. This doesn't match the 1980s-90s abduction narrative at all, which was dominated by stories of terror, medical trauma, and violation. If Salter was making this up or influenced by UFO culture, why didn't his story match what everyone else was reporting? Instead, his account sounds more like the 1950s contactee stories, friendly space brothers with positive intentions. Except unlike George Adamski and Howard Menger, Salter wasn't selling books about trips to Venus. He wasn't starting a cult. He wasn't asking for money. He wrote one rare self-published account and otherwise continued his life of activism and teaching. Fifth, physical evidence. The scoop marks on both men. The documented physical changes to Salter's body: rapid hair growth, age spot disappearance, wrinkle reduction, enhanced healing. His son growing 1.5 inches after his growth plates should have closed. You can dismiss one person's testimony. You can't as easily dismiss measurable physical changes witnessed by family, friends, and colleagues. The skeptical argument goes like this. Salter experienced a powerful psychological event, maybe a vivid dream, maybe a dissociative episode triggered by stress or the metal plate in his skull, maybe sleep paralysis. He interpreted this experience through 1980s UFO culture. The physical changes? Coincidence. Hormonal fluctuations. Measurement error. It's a tidy explanation. Comfortable. It preserves our understanding of reality. But there's one problem. Motivation. John Salter Jr. gained absolutely nothing by telling this story. He risked his academic reputation. He invited mockery. He opened himself up to accusations of mental instability. And he did it anyway. Why? For money? He didn't sell his story. He self-published a rare account most people never read. For attention? He already had attention. He was already in history books. He was already respected. For psychological reasons? This is a man who sat calmly while a racist mob burned him with cigarettes, who continued organizing after a car crash, who never cracked under FBI surveillance. His psychological resilience was already proven by history. So the skeptical explanation requires believing that this particular man, of all people, suddenly experienced a psychological break that perfectly mimicked alien abduction, then convinced his son to corroborate it, all while experiencing coincidental physical changes, despite having no apparent motive to fabricate such a story. It's possible, technically, but is it probable? The March 1988 incident wasn't the end of the story for John Salter Jr. According to his own accounts, the contact continued throughout the rest of his life. He described subsequent encounters. Not abductions exactly, more like communications, sightings, a sense of ongoing connection with the beings he'd met. He never became a full-time UFO researcher or lecturer. He remained, first and foremost, an activist and educator. But those who knew him in his later years say he was convinced the experience was real. He spoke about it when asked. He didn't hide it. But he also didn't make it the centerpiece of his identity. He was John Salter Jr., civil rights activist, who also happened to have been abducted by aliens, not the other way around. In 2019, he died at his home in Pocatello, Idaho, at age 84. News of his death spread internationally, but not because of aliens. Because of that photograph from Woolworth's lunch counter. Because of his work with Medgar Evers. Because of his lifetime of fighting for justice. So what are we left with? On March 20th, 1988, something happened to John Salter Jr. and his son on Highway 14 in central Wisconsin. They experienced missing time. They saw a craft. Months later, detailed memories surfaced without hypnosis. Physical changes occurred that were witnessed by family and colleagues. Either this man, a documented hero of the civil rights movement, a professor, an activist with decades of proven courage, experienced a genuine alien abduction by friendly extraterrestrial beings, or one of the most credible witnesses in American history had a powerful psychological experience that he genuinely believed was real, accompanied by coincidental physical changes with no apparent motive to fabricate any of it. Those are your options. There's no middle ground here. There's no, maybe he was mistaken about what he saw, because what he claimed wasn't ambiguous. It was specific, detailed, and corroborated by his son. The John Salter Jr. case forces an uncomfortable question. If someone with his documented credibility His proven psychological resilience, his lack of financial motive, and his history of unshakable honesty tells you he was abducted by aliens. Do you believe him? Or do you conclude that even heroes can be mistaken about their own experiences? That the human mind is capable of creating impossibly vivid false memories, even in the most stable individuals? History will remember John Salter Jr. for sitting at that lunch counter in Jackson, Mississippi, for working alongside Medgar Evers, for teaching generations of students about civil rights and Native American studies, for never backing down in the face of hatred and violence. But for those who study the UFO phenomenon, John Salter Jr. represents something else entirely. He's the most credible abductee in history, the witness you can't easily dismiss, a case that won't go away, no matter how many rational explanations you throw at it. Look at that photograph from Woolworth's one more time. That man, covered in mustard, blood running from his face, salt in his wounds, who refused to move, who wouldn't break, who told the truth no matter the cost. 25 years later, he told another truth. And just like at that lunch counter, he refused to back down, even when it meant risking the legacy he'd spent a lifetime building. Was he telling the truth about the abduction? I genuinely don't know. But I know this. John Salter Jr. believed he was. And if anyone earned the right to be taken seriously, even when telling an impossible story, it's the man in that photograph.